My name's Tyler, the producer, and I created my top 5 tips to help you use Pro Tools quicker and more efficiently and be more successful when you're creating your music. So check it out. Let's go. All right, let's get into it. Tip number 1 is going to be to work off of a template when you're recording. This is going to save you a ton of time in the long run because when you get into your session, you can get straight to recording. You don't have to create all the tracks, do all the routing, all the color coding, all that kind of stuff every time right out of the gate. So I have a free template in the description below that you can download to get you started, and there's a description video with it as well to explain how to use it. But I want to show you here a basic template and what you can do to incorporate it. All right, so when you're working off a template, it's going to look, something like this. Basically, the things you would normally use in a session are already there, and when you create your session, it imports all those things. So it saves you a lot of time. You can open the template I have below or create your own, and then when you have your elements in there that you want, that you use regularly, then you just come up here to File, Save as Template, and you can name it. And then basically, when you create a new session, you can click on Start from Template, and then just click on that name below, and all of those elements will be pulled into your session here. All right, tip number 2 is going to be to stay organized, and there's a few main ways you can do this initially. One of them is going to be always make sure that you name your tracks. You don't want your tracks called something like Audio 1 or Audio 2 because you'll lose track of things pretty quickly. It'll become confusing. Another thing is your track order. It's a good habit to get into to have your tracks ordered the same way. I personally like to have the click first, and then my drums, followed by my percussion, then my bass, then my keyboards, synth, and then guitars, and then vocals last, and then finally a master fader. So that's kind of the way I like to have my things ordered, and I know every time I'm looking at my session, roughly where to look for what I'm looking for. And then also color coding. Color coding is good for broad strokes. If you just glance at your screen, and it saves your eyes. If you're recording for a long time, you can just see the color and know what it is without having to read the small text. First one, track names. We want to make sure down here in our mix window, which is also going to be on the side here in our edit window, it's very important to name things what they are, because as you get more and more tracks, if they're just named Audio 1 or Audio 2 or whatever they kind of auto-populate as when you create the track, it's going to get really confusing really fast. So some of these sort of like housekeeping things with Pro Tools are good habits to get into. To rename the track, you basically just double click on the name and then you can call it, whatever it is. And then you can hit next and basically rename every track that way, or just double click on the track. The next thing is going to be the track order. To me, it's a big deal to kind of know roughly where in the session everything is. So I always do my click, followed by my drums, any percussion, bass. For this, I have a loop right here, piano, acoustic, and then my vocals last, and then my master fader. That's the way I like to do it. You can do any way that you're comfortable with, but it is good to have some consistency with that. And then the last thing is the track color. So I always use consistent colors. I always use blues for my drums, yellow for my bass, my guitar is red, my vocals are green, and within the group of vocals, the doubles and the harmony and everything are all different shades of green under those subgroups. So I can tell the difference between them and my lead vocal. So those kind of organizational habits are going to really help you in the long run. Things will just go way smoother and be way easier, and you won't even have to think about Pro Tools as much while you're recording. All right, leave a comment below. Let me know what's giving you troubles with Pro Tools, what's tying you up, and hopefully we can help each other figure it out. And we're on to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is really important, and this one drives me nuts when people don't do it. It's just leave a little bit of space at the beginning of your session before you start recording. Maybe 4 bars, 8 bars, something like that, so that there's room for a count off. Sometimes you record a track and at the end you have an idea for a cool little intro that begins before the song. So you want to leave space for that, so at the end of the recording you don't have to just shift the whole thing over. This is also a big deal if you're going to be collaborating with other musicians and artists. A lot of times when you're collaborating, you'll send your session to them and they can add their thing to it. So you always want to make sure you leave that space at the beginning so they can have a count off. Otherwise, if the music just starts right at the beginning of the session, then they're going to miss the downbeat and they'll have to shift everything over. So it's just a good habit to get into, and it's something pretty useful. Tip number 4, this one is going to speed up your process a ton, and it just involves a little bit of practice to get used to it. But it's to learn the edit modes and the edit tools till they become second nature. And I'm going to show you what they are on the screen here and how to use them. But once you get these things to where they're second nature and you can move quickly, you're going to be able to edit and work on your track in real time. I know that mixing and mastering and tracking are all separate processes, but when I record and produce an artist, I really like to have the bigger picture in mind the whole time. The better things sound as you're recording, the more excited the artist becomes, the more excited you are, the more creative you feel. So I'm constantly trying to edit and polish as I'm recording. It's all kind of one process for me up until I give it to a mixing engineer at the end. We're going to start over here on the left where it says grid and slip. We're not going to worry about shuffle and spot for the sake of this video, but slip and grid are the two important ones for right now. So basically with slip mode, I can take an audio file and pull it anywhere. It doesn't have to be on the grid or the BPM. It can really be anywhere in the session. And if I'm on grid, when I pull it around, it's going to go to whatever subdivision of the beat I have set here in this grid setting. So if I put it on a quarter note, when I move it, it's going to click to the nearest quarter note. That goes with moving the track, it goes with peeling it back. Any alteration of the track is going to happen on that subdivision of the beat. So if you are doing some programming and everything in your session is to a BPM, that's going to be very important. Sometimes if you're doing a crossfade where you punched in a vocal or something, slip mode helps you find the space in between breaths or in between words where you can make a really clean cut. So both of these tools, grid and slip, are really important to get under your fingers right away. And then the next thing is going to be this tool up here that has 3 modes, and then if you click right above it in this rectangle, it creates a tool that's a hybrid of all 3. I use that tool that's a hybrid of all 3. I probably use that 80% of the time, I'd say, maybe 90% of the time. Basically what that does, I'll show you on this track. I have my Nashville Electric loop library of electric guitar loops. I just put this together for this video. So here's an electric guitar loop out of that library, and then a little simple beat I put under it. So say I want to click on a region to select it. I would use this tool in the middle right here, and it creates this eye, and basically that lets you click anywhere and hold down the mouse and drag it, and you can select any region or click any region if you want to play from there. The next tool, this hand, if I grab the audio, the hand moves the audio around. So it moves it around. So I'll click grid and then use the hand to shift it by a quarter note each time. The last tool on the left here is going to allow you to peel the audio back when you're on the edge, or if you have a cut here in the audio, you can peel it in or across. Basically you're peeling that audio around. So when we choose this rectangle above and it creates this hybrid tool of all 3, what that's going to do, when you zoom in on your audio file in the edit mode, if you're in the top half of the audio file vertically, it becomes this cursor tool. If you're in the lower half, it becomes the hand tool. And if you're on the edge, you can peel it in and peel it back. So it's a hybrid of all 3. So if you get comfortable with that hybrid tool, you can edit in real time and you can work way faster. All right, our time together is almost over. We're on to tip number 5. Tip number 5 is going to be to really pay attention to your levels that you're recording and your gain staging. This is really important because when you're recording audio, you don't want to record it too loud to where the volume peaks and overdrives and goes into the red, because that's a very brittle, harsh sound, the digital distortion. We don't want that. Also, at the same time, you don't want your audio to be too quiet, because then your noise floor is loud and that can ruin your audio as well. You'll have a noisier recording when you boost it. So you want a healthy signal coming in, but just not peaking. And at the same time, you want to make sure that when you play all your tracks together, the levels of the faders are not so hot that your master fader is peaking either, because that's going to ruin your recording as well. So you always want to keep your eye on your levels, and you kind of develop an innate sense for this the longer you record. It sort of starts to become a little bit second nature. You do it a little bit by feel, but you do want to be aware of this while you're recording and not to be recording too hot all the time. And lastly, this is related to the last tip, but it's kind of its own thing, is learning the export settings, because when you're exporting your session, you want to make sure you have the right settings and that everything leaves Pro Tools and becomes a WAV file or an MP3 or whatever you want it to be at the sample rate you want, at the bit rate you want. So really knowing those export settings is going to help you have better recordings and better success with Pro Tools. All right, lastly, the export settings. I just want to show you real quick. So say you have your recording. So say I want to bounce this down because I'm going to send it to somebody. So I can basically select the region from start to finish where I want to bounce it down. And then if I go to bounce to and then disk, I have my settings here. So your bounce source, you're going to want that to be your output, whatever your output's named. So that's your output. Then your file type, WAV or MP3. I'm just going to say MP3. Format interleaved, meaning it's a stereo interleaved file. Your sample rate 48, and then you can just basically choose the location where you're exporting. Test and then hit bounce. And if you hit offline right here, it'll bounce down way faster. If you don't have offline on, it's going to bounce down in real time. So it's always way quicker to use offline. And then the other thing you can do, if you want to export a single file and not the whole session, just double click on it to where it's selected. If you hold Shift Apple K, you can do export selected. Or you can select it and then go up here to export. Whoops, never mind, forget that. File type, same sort of settings as when you bounce it down, and then tell it where to go. And then when you hit export, you're going to bounce out just this file here, not the whole session. Alright, I hope this helps you with your recording process and using Pro Tools more smoothly. I want to remind you to like and subscribe below. I'm going to be making a bunch more content like this geared towards music production. And I also want to remind you, I have my Nashville Electric loop library and my Cosmic Guitar Banjo loop library below. They're royalty-free loops that you can use for your productions to get an authentic Nashville vibe in your recordings. So check those out and stay creative. Keep recording and good luck.